was on sacrificial giving. I'll open it up. Who have thoughts on chapter 12?
Sorry, what was the question?
Any thoughts?
Oh,
Anything you like about chapter 12?
what do you remember from your point was really interesting. Sacrificial giving. Like, only thing you remember from that chapter.
That covered alms, but I'm trying to.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah.
Tithing maybe.
I
Yep.
was blown away by him saying the poor, I mean, which may be any of us, but like, are
Can you
like,
turn
and,
up the volume and?
sorry, like that the poor are an altar
Oh, yes.
upon
yes.
which
Oh, okay.
we sacrifice our gifts to Christ. Like the image of that, and that that actually deserves a reverence. I mean, I think I felt that way. I mean, I've asked people to pray for me, you know, if you've given something or whatever, but, to me, it just made it all the more beautiful,
Yeah,
the giving. I don't know, anyway.
yeah. Yeah, that really long Chrysostom quote.
So I didn't read the chapter,
Yes.
but it reminds, sorry, it's good for the soul. But what Annabeth just said reminds me of the story of St. Martin of Tours, which just recently remembered, where he cuts his the cloak and gives it to the poor man. And then that night he sees Christ wearing the cloak.
Mm. Yes.
One thing that kind of stood out to me was it said to reverence the poor,
Mm-hmm.
and I had never thought of it that way. To actually,
The mindset, really.
Yeah.
Because, you ever like give a few bucks to someone in need, and you're like, okay, all right, that slips your mind.
That appeases my own. Okay, I've
Well,
done what I've done what I.
That might be.
Well, kind of, but it's also like absolutely thinking about it.
Yeah.
There's no intentionality.
Well, that's a good segue into the first question. When we give to those in need, we often focus on helping them, that is, fixing their situation. But if we see these works of charity as a sacrifice in the ancient sense, how might this change our perspective?
Like the friend making kind of thing?
Yeah, I think so.
When someone would come up to me and ask for money, I would usually either say I don't have money, or I'd question, well, what are they gonna use it for? I wouldn't directly say it, but it was always my question. But last night, in front of the store, a guy comes up, asked for some money for $1, and I was able to reach in and hand him more than $1, and I said, "What's your name? Please pray for me." And so I looked at it as an opportunity to ask him to pray for me,
Yeah.
which
Wow.
he told me his name was Corey, and he said, "Would you please pray for me too?" So it was kind of it was a joyful sacrifice on my part, which I think brought him some joy as well.
And in terms of like what we've been looking at, like in terms of sacrificing, ultimately, like the idea of thinking of the poor as an altar in which we open ourselves up to relationship with God. Like that was also kind of a personal exchange. Like your relationship building with somebody else in that way too, through that offering.
Well, one of the other things that was really striking in this chapter was how I was saying the helping the homeless was I forget who said it. They were saying that's even more important than the priestly duties. Remember that part?
Was it in the long quote?
What was it?
I don't remember.
I remember too.
Yeah,
Like that's really interesting.
Like what you're offering at that moment is tantamount to what we offer on the altar.
Mm-hmm. Right.
The altar sanctifies it, but they are the altar.
Yes,
Right.
yes.
Right.
right. So, let's turn to page 225 and 226 if you have your books. The really long quote by John Chrysostom. He teaches us to reverence the poor like a holy altar. So here's a practical question. I don't know that there will even be a sufficient answer tonight, but it's something for us to continue to think about collectively. What are some ways we can put this into practice?
I think what, I was just thinking about with that question, I think this was in like a homily or something about when you give something to, someone under the freeway pass, that how often their response is, God bless you, and in our generation, we don't say those words, we're hesitant to say Merry Christmas, to be sensitive and stuff like that. But to take that as like a genuine blessing and not just like a lip service, that person is actually, possibly closer to God than we are in our journey, especially, if you're going through a struggle, you tend to be closer to God. So I think a starting point would be, take that seriously when they do, if they respond, thank you and God bless you, like take that sincerely.
Like receive it as a blessing as you would from
Priest.
a priest or a bishop, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that's actually beautiful.
You should put that in the book.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on that?
Well, the scripture even says that sometimes we have entertained angels unaware. So maybe
Yeah.
we don't know who these people are, homeless people or whatever. Sometimes we see them as people that are the bottom of the bottom, the lowest of the low, but we don't know. It could be angels unaware. We're unaware.
But it's not just that, it's also, every single one, it's Christ.
Well, and out of that really long Chrysostom quote, the part that I underlined was, you will be able to see this altar lying everywhere, in both alleys and marketplaces, and to sacrifice on it every hour.
Wow.
And it's like, yeah, that's a high calling.
Even that imagery that calls up, it's just.
Right. Well, even somebody who's ordained, at most, you can sacrifice on the altar once a day. Offer one sacrifice. And that only happens in monasteries, really. And it's no, here's an altar that you can sacrifice on all the time. So, giving to the church is often described as stewardship. And this is a good way to think about it. However, seeing giving as sacrifice in the ancient sense adds a different complementary perspective. How are these two perspectives similar, and how are they different? I think the first answer, obviously, let me start again. Stewardship has a real sense of duty to it. I'm a military guy. I've got no problem with duty. And yet, I think this idea that when we've been talking about sacrifice as some sort of initiation, some sort of ongoing invitation into relationship. It just adds a much more personal element. At least that's kind of my thought.
What's really interesting about this section for me was just the reiteration of what St. Paul says about when he says the Lord commanded those who proclaim the gospel to get their living from the gospel. I was like, and we're the ones providing that living. That's the sacrifice that we must offer. It's also a reminder to tithe, because like, how many times do I forget?
I think in the ancient sense, in the gift-giving way, like as we think about Christmas, a lot of people up their donations to charitable events
Yeah.
or Thanksgiving. And that's like, you see that as a gift, you know, if you give money to a monastery or your favorite charity.
Yeah.
Like you don't see that as like a burden or a stewardship.
Right,
More
right.
as like a gift, you know, to bless others. So I think that relates to the
Right.
sacrifice in the ancient sense.
And a lot of times we think about stewardship in terms of our own parish, like, and so I wonder if, again, I mean, a lot of this chapter, I think he focuses a lot on just changing perspectives, like, and perhaps the whole book. So I mean, even thinking it of as a welcoming gift, your offering, tithe, whatever, I don't know, it could reshape the way you view even the mission of your parish as like outwardly focused. You know, so you give to missionaries or to charities during Thanksgiving and Christmas because you agree with their mission or, you know, whatever, and, you know, stewardship, it's like, I don't know, this is me spitballing, but, you know, this idea of like stewardship, or thinking about it only in terms of stewardship is perhaps even a little more inward. You know, this is our place, we've got to take care of it and make sure the lawn's mowed and the plumber comes when he needs to, you know, all that kind of stuff. I don't know.
It's something we need to, like you mentioned, you know, the causes. Hello, Chucky. Donations to various things that we think the causes are fantastic, but we got to realize that one of the most important causes is the ministry of the church, and that it should be actually probably the most important thing to actively support.
Yeah.
Not to be like, oh, the grass needs to be mowed.
Right.
I don't know if I'll have those thoughts.
You know, it's not really different also, I think stewardship implies me doing the work,
Mm-hmm.
and an offering of sacrifice implies God doing the work. Giving to him and thanking him.
Wow.
Another perspective shift that we can have here is going back to question number one. If we're seeing what we're doing is fixing their situation, there's usually a we're above and they're below, and that removes love. So I think an aspect of shifting, for me, a shift of perspective is not so much fixing. I mean, I've done a lot of fixing in this parish. I've fixed houses, I've fixed cars, and I can do the coaching work as well. But if Paul said, if I do these things but not have love, that's a major issue. So for me, at the moment, I'm thinking of the shift from fixing, helping, stewardship to ancient sacrifice was about relationship, as Roger shared about giving to the person he gave to last night. There was more relationship involved in that than before. And so to see it as the ancient sacrifice, it's about the relationship, which means it's about love. It's not about necessarily the monetary issue so much.
Yeah.
as, am I gonna choose to allow the love of God to flow through me to another human being?
You know, and the other thing, I mean, and again, this is just off the top of my head, but this idea that you know, if we're going back to the early chapters 3, 4, wherever it was like one of the ideas behind sacrifice in the book of Leviticus. It was a sort of a promise of an ongoing relationship. It was establishing a relationship, building a relationship, and then contributing to its longevity. And you know, we kind of have this, again, even on the idea of stewardship, there's this idea, well, it's like, well, that's my church, and as long as it's my church, I'll be a steward of my church. But if I want to go to a different church and want another church to be my church, I'll be my steward of that church. Whereas, you know, this idea of sacrifice, you know, may just be even more of a promise of kind of that long-term mission to one particular place and parish. I don't know. Again, that's just a thought like that promise of an ongoing commitment relationship. I don't know.
I have an antithesis to this, and I'll give you an example. This is back when I was with the Calvary Chapel, when I was in this play, and we're practicing, and my friend says, "Oh, I'm hungry." I said, "Tell you what, I'll go out and buy some food." So I went to a small market, and I bought some food. You had to buy a loaf. I bought a loaf. You had to buy the meat. I bought a bunch of meat. I bought a cheese. Well, I gotta buy this amount of cheese. So I'm walking all this food, and all of a sudden this guy comes and goes, "Hey, you got any money?" I go, "I got something better. I bought all this food, and you can have half of it." "Oh no, I want some money." No. So where do you draw the line between? Obviously, he wanted the money for something else. I mean, I was willing to give.
Yeah. Well, you were. I mean, I want to be careful how I answer this because I don't want in any way to diminish the line. You will be able to see the poor as an altar lying everywhere, both alleys and marketplace, and to sacrifice on it at every hour. So I don't want to diminish that statement. You know, but at the same time, I mean, I think you were presenting an offering. You were giving an offering. And it wasn't rejected by God, it was rejected by man.
Okay,
Find
there we go.
another altar.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, there's I like that.
But is there an aspect of trusting that God, like, okay, be like, I have a 5 in my pocket, if you wanted cash, and then trust like God can work through that?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, we were, who was I talking to recently about our friend out there? The lady who lived out here for a while, Alana, yeah. I was talking about talking to somebody about her recently, and I mean, Alana, John, you took her plates of food, correct?
Coffee.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I saw other people take her plates of food. People come, sit next to her, offer her water, offer her ice packs, all, you know, this, that, and the other. Sometimes she took things reluctantly. Sometimes she didn't. She never, ever asked anything of anybody. You know, she was not sitting out there begging for anything. She was not coming into coffee hour, you know, with her hand out, like trying to get something out of us. And yet, you know, a few people who were able to engage her, she wasn't terribly talkative, but a few people who were able to engage her, you know, said, "Is there anything you need?" And most of the time she would say no, but I think to 2 people that I know of, she's like, "Honestly, I just need a little cash." And from what I understand, both of those people gave her a little cash. I mean, not tons of money, but it's like, well, she's out there, she's not begging, she's not smoking meth. I mean, as an example, you know, I mean, we weren't seeing empty liquor bottles strewn about. you know. And so, I think in a situation like that, we can freely give and trust that God's going to accept our sacrifice in a way, and you trust that she is going to use it well. You know, but there is a flip side too. I mean, I know people who have had homeless family members who are drug addicts. It's like, well, we're called to be wise as serpents, harmless as doves, and it's like, help in every way that you can help, but giving money's not a help. You know, so the very short answer, in other words, discernment, and trust that God's leading you in the right direction. You know, there is in a conversation from probably 4 or 5 years ago when Father Jeremy was translating a lot of Cyril, which ultimately led to this book. I remember having a conversation that there was a portion of the sacrifice, and I haven't found it in the book yet, but there was specifically a portion that was just going to be wasted. And he saw it related. I think Cyril was saying something to the fact, like relating it to the fact that like sometimes we give knowing that it's just going to be wasted. And that's just sort of what you accept when you give freely. Let's kind of look at it in terms of actually sharing your faith, evangelism. He, you know, specifically notes sharing your faith is another way to offer sacrifice to God. How might our perspective change? Again, when we put it in terms of sacrifice, viewing evangelism or sharing your faith as a sacrifice to God, how might that change your perspective and perhaps the perspective of our parish when we think of it in terms of sacrifice? I mean, for me, I think it's. I mean, I'm going to be real with you. I'll be vulnerable here. I mean, as a priest, it's like, well, you know, I mean, more people in, improves the longevity of the church, more likely to get that building built. This is great. But if I actually think about it rightly, you know, I'm thinking, okay, sharing my faith with others is.
That's hard. It's a friend thing.
Yeah, I mean, it both builds relationship with God and another person. Like, again, ultimately, it's a friend-making gift.
That was at the end of chapter 13.
Was it?
That was a great.
Was
book.
it?
Well, was it? Was that at the end of?
I thought it was at the end of chapter 12, but I may. Yeah, sharing the faith at the end of chapter 12.
That was a great book.
So I mean, and he noted two different things. It was both sharing faith with unbelievers and then bringing Christians closer to God. And both are seen as friend-making gifts.
Even as someone that's grown up in the church, I don't know how much, you know, sharing of faith I've actually done in my life. Like, very, very little. And, you know, I could always say about that, I share my faith by being a loving person, by connecting to people. But actively, especially in the sense of, you know, this is something I'm offering up to God, sacrifice. I've done nothing like that. I don't know how.
You know, okay.
I think, I guess in our experience that we found that just by inviting people into our home that sort of stimulates conversation, because we,
Cause our eye concordance.
No,
right
I-
by-
now it is,
but, I mean, I guess at this point, several friends that we, we have just, just in entertaining, they're curious or wondering, what's up with that, the icons.
Yeah.
There's certainly, if nothing else, they're conversation starters. But, of course, they're more than that, but, I think around the time, somewhere around the time that we got married, we were listening to, there's Father Josiah had a kind of, well, it was, on the good wife and good husband, sort of just like their roles, and so he talks a little bit about, we're all called to the sort of royal priesthood, and sort of what that means in the scope of our roles as husband and wife. And so part of that was just, we evangelize not by, knocking door to door and sort of forcing ourselves on people, but just by being an example of the church, and letting people sort of, like the come and see kind of mentality.
And even inviting people into your lives is, it's also a jumping off point, right? Because, and again, here's something I'll perhaps have to answer for one day. It was like, when George was being baptized, I was like, oh, we'll just keep it small. And like, a work friend that, I'd gotten to know, we'd gotten to know her family a little bit. I see her on Monday, and I said, oh yeah, you had a great weekend. George was baptized on Saturday. And she's like, dude, you didn't invite me? And it's like, again, like, I missed an opportunity to invite somebody to church. We have enough special services where, I mean, the survey that gets kind of bandied about that I've heard is like, 3 out of every 4 people, like, if you invited them to church, they would probably go with you, or say they would probably go with you. I mean, now that doesn't, those numbers probably go down if you are just like, I don't know, nobody goes to the bank anymore. Like, so if you're in the grocery store, well, nobody goes to the grocery anymore. If you're in the gas station, and the gas station attendant is like, and you're like, hey, you want to come to church? Like, okay, that's a little bit different, but like, people that you know, and special services, things like baptisms even.
Maybe, it's like you said, the wedding.
Oh, the wedding, yeah.
Your uncle, what was it, when we saw him?
Oh, I thought you were talking about Jim and Pam's wedding.
No.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah, but even like, this was like, 15 years ago, and he's like, I remember being at the wedding, it was like so beautiful, and I'm like, oh wow, like, that was his one experience.
Yeah,
He's
yeah.
done something where he still remembered that.
Yeah.
Well, like not 15 months.
I'm not in trouble now. I'm not in trouble now.
Was it nice?
Another issue is you have to be all things to all people. And I basically have in my head all the basic religions and philosophies, so when I meet somebody, I ask them where they're coming from, and then I'm able to communicate. Because I guess because it's coming from Calvary Chapel, I don't want to be the notch type of guy, the Bible, God, no, right? So you have to become the friend, you gotta meet them where they are. And I find it very effective.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
It's interesting that
Okay.
it's a friend making focus, cause I think of religion, like just personally as like a, like a touchy subject. I mean, I haven't had any negative experiences
Right.
telling anyone, it's just the society's kind of brings that. And so like I hide it within myself, like even with long-term friends, I'm like, well, I don't wanna put them off by like talking about my church all the time.
Yeah.
So this rephrasing it is kind of like, it could be a deepening of that friendship, not like
Yeah.
the end of that friendship or a turning off, it could
Right.
be something they're looking for.
Well, and I mean, it's an opportunity to trust God. Which is an opportunity to, again, build that relationship as well. And it's like, you trust God that He's brought different people into your life for various reasons. I mean, it's,
I think because we live in a capitalist society, people can immediately sense when you're trying to sell them something.
amen.
So, that's where I think, it has to be that you genuinely care about
Yeah.
something, or they genuinely want to know.
Yeah,
But if it's just you're trying to save them, people just can tell. And
Yeah.
it's it really puts people off and has the opposite effect of what.
yeah, I agree.
That's a good point.
Okay, chapter 13. Well, did chapter 13 give you anybody a new perspective on why to go to church? I mean, kind of throwing it out there. I mean, specifically some of the things that we do in church. I mean, in the Divine Liturgy, lighting candles, the incense, all of that kind of stuff.
Not really why to go to church, but more how.
A new perspective while you're there.
How to go to church.
Yeah, maybe a better way to put it.
I'm like, I've been doing all this wrong.
The one that was interesting was like Chrysostom, that one, like, Abraham goes up.
Right.
So
Yeah.
he was alone, there's nothing there to distract him, nothing, and you're kinda like, okay.
And you know, some thoughts want to go up with you,
Yeah,
you're like, no,
I
stay
think,
down.
yeah, I feel like, I invite the whole village with me, I'm like, everyone is there.
And I'll come back to you with the boy. I was, after reading that, I had to pause and just never thought of it that way.
Like we've had that discussion, I don't know, several weeks ago, like, the fathers, when interpreting scripture, like, yeah, there's like, okay, here's what it means, here's also what it means, and here's also what it means. And it's like, yeah, that one is, I had never heard that until I read it. That was amazing. Do you wanna elaborate on it a little bit more, just, so,
Yeah, like,
it was Cyril, right,
it's
saying,
Chrysostom.
it was Chrysostom, talking about Abraham and Isaac.
Yes. And let me just get the page.
241.
Yep.
240, on the bottom of 240 up to 241. He said, like, he left the servants, he left, the donkey, he left everything, he talked irrational and stupid, and only take what's reasonable, like pure thoughts, like
Yeah,
kind of centeredness. So there's nothing to disturb you.
right, up the hill to sacrifice Isaac, or up the hill to offer his sacrifice. Not even wood.
Right.
Yeah. And so, yeah, he says, go up, take whatever is reasonable, and as Abraham took Isaac. Build the altar as he did, having nothing human about yourself, but having gone beyond that nature, since he too would not have slain his child unless he was beyond human nature. And let nothing disturb you there then, but be lifted higher than the heavens themselves. And so that's how he's describing your posture for prayer, offering that sacrifice during prayer. And if you've ever tried to pray evening prayers with 4 children, or one for that matter, yeah, or none actually, just by yourself. Yeah, that's difficult.
I did like did like the section where it was talking about in human relationships, or when honoring the like, for instance, a boss honoring an employee. Like, you're very specific about it, not just like, good job.
Right,
It's
right.
like, for God, it's not like, you're awesome, God. Like,
Yes, yes.
No, it is meet and right
That-
to hymn thee, to bless thee, to praise thee. It's specific.
That
It's
just
precise.
killed me. I found I got a good chuckle out of that one.
Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, that was really good.
Brought back my middle school days, because that is a Protestant
You rain
song that
from
we
heaven
sang
above.
in chapel. Yeah,
Want to take it first?
oh, that's the worst, if you're an awesome comic, Matt knows the rest.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just gonna read the quote. All right, so what he's talking about is he's specifically saying, not in a prideful way, but focusing on right theology and sort of like theological concepts, like conceptually high. Nope. Oh, okay. And kind of offering that in the church. So he's saying, you know, the paragraph before, he says, in the church, theology is not merely an academic exercise, but an act of worship, a proclamation of God's greatness and his goodness. And so then he says, further down the page, this is on 237, so he says, our praise is more meaningful when it is not just your awesome God, but instead, it is meet and right to him thee, to bless thee, to praise thee, to give thanks unto thee, to worship thee in every place of thy dominion, for thou art God ineffable, inconceivable, invisible, incomprehensible, ever existing and eternally the same, thou and thine only begotten Son, and thy Holy Spirit. I mean, which is awesome, but like it's much awesomer.
It's like they tell you to do that with kids, right? You say, well, like, don't say, like, great job. Like,
Yeah.
that you stuck with it, that you didn't give up, that you, like.
Yeah, actually.
Point out those little, you know, we do it with our
Yeah.
kids, or we try to, whatever, but.
Yeah.
You're being manipulated.
I've taught you don't trust the law.
Does anybody want to comment on incense and candles? Anybody change perspective, change thoughts on the little section on incense and candles? It's very short, almost one page. I mean, really, they serve as icons. I mean, like, I think, like, I mean, they're a sacrifice, I mean, I think. But, you know, they're representative of our words and thoughts rising to God with a spiritually appealing aroma that attracts him, you know. I mean, they are prayers, they're in some sense. But they're iconic in a way.
When I was little, like, I think the first time I went to St. Paisius Monastery, we were there for an early morning service, and I was standing by the candle box, literally watching it melt through the never-ending service when I was like 13. And at the time, I think I was praying for the service to end, but now I'm like, you know, like, it was a really beautiful, like, early morning service, and like, it's something that I always think back of, like, my mind at that, you know, at that age, watching the candle melt, like, this church service is just going on.
So,
But,
if I'm standing at the altar and look here, I will see Eleanor just staring at candles. And then if I look to my right, where the censer hangs, Timmy is staring at the incense. Like, I mean, same dead look on their face.
praying for coffee hour.
Yeah, and all of it. So I feel like every week the Eucharist has come up as an example of kind of sacrifice of what we've been talking about. Do you feel like I don't even want to say this chapter, I mean the 5 pages dedicated to the Eucharist, they were good. But I feel like, do you feel like the books change your perspective on how you see the Eucharist?
I like how I broke it down, like, it's food and drink, it's friend making.
Yeah.
Okay, like, it's also the fruit of our labor, because we have, like, you know, your dinners and.
Right.
And then and then it's also just a blessing from God, that provides the soil, the rain.
Yeah.
And you kind of like just, and then it is like the blood of the sacrifice.
Right, and it's even, you know, memorials of Christ's sacrifice, like that.
Yeah, that one was interesting.
Yeah. And so, they are humanly designed symbols of Christ. I mean, and has everybody seen the full Proscomedia? with the seal on it and everything like that. I mean,
Wait, what,
It's been a while.
is the pros committee when the
Or-
pros was prepared?
excuse me, the Prosphora, you do it. Yeah, the Prosphora, I'm sorry. So everybody's seen the Prosphora, I just wanted to make sure, if you haven't, well, it's here. You can kind of see it on the front of your book. But it's the seal that's on each loaf of bread. I mean, and so again, that contributes to this idea of memorial.
What's the problem mean?
Proscomedia is actually the service where we prepare the lamb. The I said proscomedia instead of prosphora, but yeah, it's almost kind of like verb noun, kind of.
We do it once a year at St. Andrews for all the students.
Oh, yeah,
They bring it out front and do it, and they emphasize that they are not, if they were really consecrating it and praying over it,
right,
it would be, have to be used in the altar, and this is
Yeah.
just a demonstration.
Yeah.
So they go through every part of it.
yeah, maybe we'll
It's
do
actually
that.
what was, Eli, it was like 45 minutes long, wasn't it, when we went through that?
Yeah, twice.
I might
You wanna go through it again?
do that, I might do that next,
It's very
we won't meet
interesting.
next week, we'll meet the week after. But I might do that at the beginning, just to kind of, if you haven't seen it, or if you saw it a long time ago, just go through it. It's, that,
The prayers.
yeah, the prayers are really beautiful, yeah. Yeah, okay. Anybody have any other comments on these two chapters?
I've got just sort of a general question,
I asked for comments, Alex, not questions.
no comments, but,
Okay,
uh,
anybody have any questions? Oh, all right, Alex.
So, I guess just to help my understanding a bit better, because, I've heard it said that, sort of the difference between, like worshiping and veneration, would be sort of in the sacrifices that we, we only offer sacrifices to God, sacrifice for, I think we were talking about this a couple weeks ago, but like for, the saints, but like it's all of it is to God. And so I guess as we're talking about the different forms of sacrifice, when we talk about the candles and the incense and then prayer and whatnot, I thought, so I guess my understanding of what sacrifice was definitely which I thought was much more narrow and made sense in the scope of that sort of explanation. So then, so if someone were to ask, okay, well, what's the difference between, what when we pray to the saints and we venerate the saints and their icons, how would you put into words then that sort of difference between not worship but veneration? Because if we're praying, we do pray to the saints. It's a conversation to. Is that my understanding is correct? So I guess it's like it feels. I could use some clarification on just putting that into words, because I guess I kind of understand it sort of internally.
Yeah, oh yeah, and okay, I mean, so, let's go back to like chapters 4, 5, and 6, where it explains the Levitical sacrificial system, right? Who was the object of those sacrifices? Who were they directed at?
Yeah, they're directed to God.
To God only,
Always to
right?
God.
So when we light a candle in church, who's that directed toward?
To God.
Because it's prayer, yeah. So if we're looking at that as sacrifice and incense of sacrifice, the Eucharist.
So is it just that different forms of, like, so depending on the nature of the prayer, then just different forms of prayer may be considered like a sacrifice of, praise
Yeah, I mean, I think so, I mean, I would say that the biggest difference is we're not offering sacrifice to the saints. We have never offered a Eucharist to Mary or to any of these saints on the wall. So, I mean, you think of it in terms of like truly sacrifice. When we pray to a saint, we're kind of, I'm gonna channel some Father Patrick here, and we're like looking at the Old English word of pray, which is request, right? And so it's simply, I mean, as simply as I can put it, it's simply a request for help from a friend, from somebody who's able, not a friend is probably too mild, but from somebody who is able to help. Does that make sense? But it would be a different path than the sacrifice, completely different.
Yeah, I guess it does help, but well, the part that we were just talking about with the comparing the "You're awesome, God" to the it is truly, you need the sort of precision of language there, and so we're like we do in a sense talk or talk in the same way about other saints and what they're sort of lauded for, like what they've done and continue to do. So it's just like both of those feel like very similar.
So I was in Torrance last night for their patronal feast, and so the Troparion for St. Matthew was sung a lot. The final line of that Troparion is praying to God for our souls. So that's the difference, and so when we think like, that's a very different hymn than when Thou, O Lord, was baptized in the Jordan, worship of the Trinity was made manifest. What's the next line? For the voice of the Father bore witness to thee when he called thee his beloved Son. And the Spirit in the likeness of a dove, I can sing it better than the Spirit in the likeness of a dove, confirm the truth of his word, O Christ our God, who hast revealed himself and enlightened the world. Glory to thee. We aren't saying glory to thee to the saints. We're saying praying to God for us. I mean, I want to make it as simple as I can, but I want to make sure you're seeing the distinction.
Yeah, it feels like it's definitely a nuance, but I see that. I do see the difference.
It is a
Like I
nuance.
said,
It
it's
is.
something it's much more clear in an internal sense than it is.
Oh yeah,
in a verbal way. But
yeah, and so I mean, and I can see how it on the surface might look confusing because it's a little weird, because it's like, all right, well, we sing in the Divine Liturgy, we sing the Resurrectional Troparion, one of the 8 Resurrectional Troparion, every Sunday in a rotation, and it's followed by hymns directed toward to the Saint of the Day. Our patronal hymn to St. Peter. I mean, I can see why, it might look blurry verbally just because we're sort of mixing some of this hymnography.
Yeah.
But each serves a different purpose.
Right.
Yeah,
that would makes it easier to sort of to talk about with other folks, with people that are sort of asking this question and kind of like, wow, like I've kind of been involved but not really been able to put to words.
Yeah.
Exactly how to make that sort of distinguishing line. Because like I said, I thought that sort of idea on what sacrifice was much more narrow, and so it was easier to explain. But then now reading this book, it sort of expands on that, and you're kind of, okay, now it makes it a lot harder.
Well, and especially because this book keeps putting it in terms of relationship. Like that's a lot. Like and so I even thinking back tonight, like we kind of, I think I even blurred the lines in saying like, well, I mean, with Roger's example, like about praying for each other and all that kind of stuff, and I was like, oh yeah, it's kind of almost like you're sacrificing Yeah, you know, like it's a friend making gift to this other person. I don't think I said a sacrifice to this person, but you can rewatch the video and see if I. That would have been misspeak if I did. I will say that. I should have said that. But like, yeah, I mean, again, this sort of relationship building out. But ultimately, sacrifice is always only for God. That's what sacrifice is for.
So, now I'm puzzled, so can you light a candle for a saint? Can't you light a candle and pray for a saint?
Sure.
So was he saying that candles were sacrifices, or is it only? I didn't read chapter 13, so.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think like in larger parishes where, or even over there, like, you know, a candle in front of an icon stand, you know, you can light a candle and say, pray to God for me, holy God, the Legion of Peter, or something like that. You know, that's not inappropriate.
Was he saying that lighting candles was a form of sacrifice?
Yeah, he was saying it too was a sacrifice.
I say there's a way to draw near, because it's like welcoming.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was talking about the scope of like, cause, you know, we kind of take our life for granted, that our houses are, you know, like when you see, you know, an inn, you know, and the windows are all lit with candles, it's much very inviting and.
Yeah.
And, sort of it was an expensive show of, or an expensive way to demonstrate welcomeness.
Right.
Yeah. I'd have to think about that. I'd have to think about that a little bit more because the lighted candles and lamps in our churches, since light is available at the flip of a switch, we generally take it for granted. Yeah, so I mean, even the thought of, I think I see where he's kind of going with this, and like, light was kind of an extravagant offering, like, so to get the harvest the beeswax or whatever, the tallow or whatever they were using, and then to make it into candles, and it almost seems like it was like the fact that you are offering candles to even be used in church. I mean, and whether you know it or not, that we have to pay for these candles. I mean that in and of itself, I think that's kind of where he's going with that. That's an offering. So it's not like the lighting of it per se. It's the fact that you're offering it to be brought into church. You know what you do with it. You light it. Represents prayer, a request. You know, so you're praying to St. Peter. You know that's perfectly fine. But the fact it's the giving of that candle.
It's the gift.
Yes,
I mean,
exactly.
that's what it's coming back to, it's not even a sacrifice per se that we offer to God, but it's a gift, I might give Matt a gift, right? Like, and he was talking, but he was talking about those gifts that we lavish on those people that we love, you know, that you might not buy for yourself, or they might not buy for themselves, or make for themselves, or, you know, whatever those
Go
things.
parachuting.
Right, yeah, that's right, he had those kind of fun, but so, I mean, in one sense, it's a gift, right, these are our friends
Yeah.
in Christ, and we're
Yeah.
bringing a little gift.
And especially on that, like not that section right here, it is at the end of chapter 13. But the lavishing of love, because we love someone so much, we want to, you know, lavish them with gifts, you know, spend a lot of money on them. Thus, we should also do the same with Christ, with spending time with him constantly, daily. And I really liked how, as we mentioned before, doing that in, and I quote, in the true sense of sacrifice, it is a welcoming, friend-making gift that invites him to be more present in our lives. I was like, that is sweet.
Yeah.
It's very sweet.
Yeah, that's good. It's time to stop though.
Yes.
All right.
It is true that we to bless thee, O Theotokos, ever blessed and most pure, and the mother of our God, more honorable than the cherubim, and glorious beyond the sniff, and thou who without corruption givest birth to God, Lord. True Theotokos, we magnify thee. Amen.
yourself to some highlighters, highlight your book, for the next.
Do not eat them?
Or take them to your classroom.
I think they were $15 or something like that, is it marked in the?
I couldn't find it. No.
But for you, Mary Jo,